Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're looking at 1 Samuel chapter 4, where we see the departure of God's glory. 1 Samuel chapter 3, chapters 1 through 3, we had the Samuel story, and now as we come to chapter 4, and there's going to be a section here going from chapter 4 to chapter 6, we're only looking at chapter 4 right now. Instead of Samuel, in fact, we won't see Samuel almost at all after the first verse. We're going to see the ark story, the ark narrative instead. In those first 3 chapters, remember Hannah was physically barren, that's Samuel's mother, and she comes and she seeks an answer from the Lord, and she's given a son. That son is Samuel, and he hears God. That's what his name means, the one who hears God. And now as we come to chapter 4, Samuel won't be part of the story. Instead, we're going to see Israel, and Israel is spiritually barren. And they seek a victory against their enemies, the Philistines, by taking the ark into battle. And instead of being given a son, we have a number of sons that are killed, including the sons of Eli, the sons of the high priest. And God, throughout this story, is going to be silent. And so we read, "Thus the word of Samuel came to all Israel." That was part of the previous chapter. "Now Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped beside Ebenezer." We're going to see where that is later because the name will be significant later in the story. "While the Philistines camped in Aphek." You have the Philistines along the coast. You have Israel up in the foothills and in the mountains. And these two are fast becoming mortal enemies. Verse 2, "The Philistines drew up in battle array to meet Israel. When the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield." That's a lot of people. It's nothing to what we're going to see, but it's a lot of people. And Israel had been defeated in battle against their enemies. And they think, what did we do wrong? What can we do to make this better? And so, verse 3, "When the people came into the camp, the elders of Israel said, 'Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies.'" Let's get God on our side. I think they've been watching too many Indiana Jones movies. And they think if the ark comes, then when the Philistines show up, the ark will go do something magical, and we'll take out our enemies. We'll get God to fight for us. We'll put it in a situation where God doesn't really have a choice. He's got to fight for us. Verse 4, "So the people sent to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sits above the cherubim." Notice the full description. It's the ark of the covenant. It's the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and this is his name that's given. And he's the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, so maybe God will show up with his armies. And he's the one that sits above the cherubim. It's not like God's really on the ark, but his presence is manifested, is symbolized by these 2 cherubim that are on the top of the ark, these 2 winged creatures that are over the ark, and they represent sort of an honor guard, which means that the ark itself represents the throne of God. You know, you've maybe seen pictures of a king in ancient history being carried on a litter, or his throne becomes portable, where they carry his throne and he's sitting on the throne. And so likewise, they're carrying the throne of God. And middle of verse 4, "And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, they were there with the ark of the covenant of God." They've got it all planned out. They're going to force God's hand. Verse 5, "As the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth resounded," and everybody has an ecstatic experience, and it's wonderful. Verse 6, "When the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, 'What does the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?' And then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp." Now notice the reaction on the part of the Philistines. Verse 7, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who shall deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods?" These are the gods who smote the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. They'd heard the stories. They'd heard the story of the Exodus. They'd heard the story of the wilderness wanderings. They'd heard the stories of how God had delivered his people way back, and that had happened hundreds of years ago, way back then. Verse 9, "And so they say, 'Take courage and be men, O Philistines, or you will become slaves of the Hebrews as they've been slaves to you. Therefore be men and fight.'" And the question is, where will the power go? Will it go to the Philistines, or will it go to the Hebrews, the ark-wielding Hebrews? Verse 10, now we find out what happened. So the Philistines fought. And much to our surprise, probably much to their surprise too, Israel was defeated. And every man fled to his tent, and the slaughter was very great, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Instead of 4,000 like before, now that's multiplied by nearly eightfold. Now there's 30,000 soldiers. Verse 11, and the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas died. This is tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. They suffer great defeat. Many people are killed, and the ark is taken, and the two representatives of the high priest, the two sons of the priest, are themselves killed. Verse 12, now a man of Benjamin, and maybe it is significant that it is a man of Benjamin, because remember, Benjamin had some very bad press at the end of the book of Judges. There had been some things they had done wrong, but we're going to see later in 1 Samuel the redemption of the tribe of Benjamin, and it will be in the person of King Saul. Now this isn't King Saul yet, but this is a man of the tribe of Benjamin who ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and dust on his head. These are signs of mourning. Verse 13, when he came, behold, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, eagerly watching, because his heart was trembling for the ark of God. Notice it doesn't say his heart was trembling for his sons. His heart was trembling for the ark of God, because that is his concern. And so the man came to tell in the city, and all the city cried out. Verse 14, when Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, what does the noise of this commotion mean? And then the men came hurriedly and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, so he's quite on in age, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. Hence he had not gone to the battle himself. He's too old for that. He's too old for those sorts of travels. Verse 16, the man said, Eli, I am the one who came from the battle line. Indeed, I escaped from the battle line today. And he said, how'd things go, my son? Verse 17, then the one who brought the news replied, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great slaughter among the people. And your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And that's all bad news. But then finally, the worst of all, and the ark of God has been taken. Verse 18, when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell off the seat backward beside the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for he was old, and notice that word heavy. I've circled it, and I've given you a Hebrew word by it. He was heavy. The Hebrew word there is kabod, means heavy, but it also has another significance too, and we're going to see that in just a moment. But remember that word, kabod. He was heavy, and thus he judged Israel 40 years, and of course that might be rounded up a little bit or down. You know, when we see these exact numbers, 40 years that he reigns, and 40 years that Saul reigns, and 40 years that David reigns, and 40 years that Solomon reigns, maybe some of those are sort of rounded either up or down. But, you know, it's a generation. And so he judged Israel 40 years. Verse 19, now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was pregnant and about to give birth, and when she heard the news that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband had died, she kneeled down and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. She goes into labor, and it's great pain, and now a child will be born, but also she will die. Verse 20, and about the time of her death, the women who stood by her said to her, do not be afraid, for you have given birth to a son. But she did not answer or pay attention. She's got bigger things on her mind. Verse 21, and she called the boy, and here's the significant part, she called the boy Ichabod. Remember that word kabod? But this has a ik prefix to it. She called the boy Ichabod, saying, the glory has departed. The kabod has ik, as it were. Not quite the same way you say it, but Ichabod means no glory. And because there is no glory, the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said the glory, the kabod, the heaviness, but it's heaviness glory, not the Israel's fat. It's the weightiness that represents God and his seriousness has departed from Israel, for the ark was taken. Now, this reminds us of a time, because 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 21 speaks about God who raised Jesus from the dead and gave him glory. You see, there was a time when when Jesus came to the earth. And of course, when he was born, there's a sense in which his glory was veiled, but especially it was veiled at the cross. Where you looked at the cross and you would have looked and you would have said, there's no glory here. That's awful. It's a crucifixion. It's a humiliation. It's shameful. And yet God came and raised him from the dead and gave him glory so that your faith and hope are in God. And that's the point. Even though we end this story in 1 Samuel chapter 4 with no glory, there's hope for the future. And we'll see that next time.